everybody. I am so glad you're here. It's me, Jackie, with Maisha Cannon. Say hi.
Hey, everyone. Happy Friday.
It's going to be a great day. I can feel it in my bones.
Yes.
Before we get started, I want to let everybody know that the best part about having Maisha here is that she's here for your questions. We could talk all day, we found out after we got a chance to meet. But so we need you to break it up. Make sure, keep us on point by asking those questions. You can put them in the question box. You can also tweet them out with the hashtag #RDaily. We are so happy you're here. And so we should just jump into it. Hi, Maisha.
Hey there. How is your week going, Miss Jackie?
You know what? If it was any better, I'd have to relive it all over.
Oh, nice. I love that. I don't think I've ever heard that answer. That was a good week.
There's a reason you probably have. I know you. I got introduced to you through Ryan Leary Noel a number of years ago. So I kind of feel familiar with your background. But for those that are watching that might not know the Maisha Cannon, why don't you let them know a little bit about yourself?
Wow, you hit me with the Maisha Cannon. Okay, let me sit up straight. So, yeah, I think I probably knew of Noel and Ryan from my days writing on RecruitingBlogs.com. But I'm a teacher. I won't say just because I did that last time. I am a teacher and a lifelong student. And I happen to be passionate about sharing insights and lessons learned from my 20-year career, from recruiting to sourcing and everything in between.
Well, it's funny because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And especially, I know you've written so much and you're open to sharing. I'm glad that we're talking about this topic because there's so many people that lose their candidates. We were talking to someone. We have these little HRTX events, and this guy in Dallas, he'd been recruiting for 3 months. It was his first job. And he said, I think I'm losing candidates because we don't pay them enough money. And we were like, because all of us old school were like, okay, let's go through the whole process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, why do you think people are losing candidates?
Well, that's interesting. So if he's losing them before they're, even engaged in the process, I mean, maybe salary, but I would tend to lean on kind of the 5 whys of design thinking and start really asking, like, so why are people dropping off at this point? And then take it another layer deeper and keep asking why until you find out. Because, salary, it's funny that most job descriptions don't even spell out the salary. So, unless you're sharing it in your first screening or people are asking, I don't see that being an early DQ point or, disqualification point, but it could be, and if the salary is posted and it's too low, you may actually not see as many applications or anything like that. But, when you're new, you look at more of the obvious reasons, like, oh, it must be the location, it must be the salary. But as to your point, as you've been in the game longer and longer, you start to understand that there's so many other pieces going on, even in candidates' personal lives that you may not be aware of, that may contribute to why they fall out of a process.
And you have to be careful, right? Like, you don't want to pry too much. But I think that there's always, you want to have enough information so that you can kind of get a vibe on how this is going to go.
Yes, that's absolutely true. And when you shared the topic with me, I wrote down 5 things that you should be when you're thinking about how you should retain candidates. And that's the first one, is really to be aware. So be aware of what the candidate has going on in their, work and life in as much as you can, right? So if they're in the middle of a big project at work, it's unlikely that they're just going to drop everything and come and join your company. Be aware of the hiring team that you're supporting. Like who's going on vacation, who's in the middle of, a tough time at work, and, how that may affect, your scheduling that's coming up and who'll be accessible. And then just be aware of the industry and the speed at which business happens. It's very different in tech than it is in public education, and it's different in hospitality than it is maybe in finance. So you have to be aware. I think that's the first thing to do when you're talking about retaining candidates, like understand, and to your point, ask the right questions, the legal questions that you can ask to find out really where this person is in their job search kind of continuum.
It's funny you mentioned of like the differences in different, tech being one way, maybe public education being another way. And you're so right about that. I think someone, again, at one of our events had mentioned that they lost the candidate. They asked them all the right questions, but they had interviewed like a year before at Google, and then they came and made him an offer. And if you know that they have those types of skills, or like people with AWS are like so hard to find, or some of these other technologies, you almost have to ask them, who have you interviewed in the past year and did not offer from?
Right. Who may be coming back around the corner with a, offer you can't refuse. That's true. And that's something we don't necessarily think to ask, because we're very much in the moment. We're under a lot of pressure as recruiters and sourcers, and we have a limited amount of information, a limited amount of time, right, to make decisions, to get people engaged. And so oftentimes I found recruiters just go from their checklist, their screening questions, and once they have that information, they're ready to move someone forward. But I've had to get much more into a mode of listening. I actually call my first phone screening a discovery call. So I'm not trying to sell the job in my first 15-minute conversation with you. I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to say, hey, Jackie, looks like you've been at RecruitingDaily 3 years. I'm sure you're loving it. Tell me what you love, and then tell me what can make your job better. And tell me where you are in your career and what would be the ideal next position. Like, I'm all ears, really, just to listen. And then I can use that information later to, hand off to the recruiter to help them close you, because I'll understand your pain points, right? And I'm not just pushing a job down your throat, because when recruiters do that and they're a little heavy-handed too soon, they miss opportunities to really build rapport and get that information and be that trusted advocate that we ought to be.
You're right. Well, let me tell you what's going on with RecruitingDaily and how you. I forgot.
After. See, right now you're ready to tell me TMI, too much information, right? But I will make notes, and I'll just be on my Evernote typing everything you say. I'll just, oh wow, that's good to know.
Well, I want to go back to those B's that you had mentioned.
Yes.
Be aware.
Yes, be aware.
What are some of the flags? Like, what should I be aware of besides their skill set?
Right. Well, I mean, everything from when you first look at, say, their LinkedIn profile or their resume, be aware of how long they've been in that role. Be aware of their career trajectory. Have they, progressed rapidly? Has it been kind of a slow climb? And then just be aware of really what you can offer. I think that's a hard truth that, we're always trying to sell our job as better than the one that the candidate is in. And that's not always the case. If it's a lateral move, you can't really sell them on title. So just be aware of as many facets of the search that you can, so that you can be realistic. And I'm sure, as you did when you were recruiting, sometimes you end a conversation with, wow, Jackie, it seems like, you have a great skill set. I don't know if it aligns with this role, but I would love to keep in touch, right? Sometimes you just have to cut it off at that first screening, because it's not worth their time or yours to push them through on a role that they won't be excited about. So just, be aware and being present and ready to listen. That's a big thing.
I remember one of the things that used to drive me crazy, it was an objection that I would hear a lot. Once you were at the offer stage, people would say, I need to talk to my spouse first before I make an offer. I used to always say, now, you know your spouse, right? Let me just help you, because when you're talking to her, I won't be there to answer the questions. So what kind of questions do you think your spouse, partner, significant is going to have, so I can make sure that I have the answers for you? And a lot of times at the end of the conversation, they'd be like, I know that she's going to say yes, or I know she's going to. And I would encourage them to the offer. I know that back in the day, and I think I'm older than you. I don't know how much older.
I don't know.
But they used to say, you don't have any candidate control. Now, then we changed it to candidate influence.
Okay.
And now we change it to candidate engagement.
Okay.
And part of that is having those conversations and knowing you have to know more about. You can ask questions. What are you doing this weekend? Oh, I'm taking my kids to a soccer game. You just make a note. Kids,
I know. But what's scary about that? I was just in a training where they talked about how asking those kind of questions can sometimes get you information that you ought not have, right? And even asking a question as, innocent as what are you doing this weekend or what do you do for fun can lead down a path where you're like, uh-oh, now I have information, even though I won't use it, to I won't say discriminate against this person. If you were the hiring manager and you had that final say, it could put you in legal hot water.
Oh,
So that's
sure.
yeah. So that's I think that's a plus of being a recruiter. We can kind of ask those questions, and we're influencers. We're not decision makers, and so it's pretty innocuous when it sits with us. But yeah, I've seen hiring managers get into that and end up getting in trouble, right? Because they find out something and then they keep going down that beaten path. Like to your point, someone says, "Oh yeah, I have a soccer game this weekend." Okay, sounds good. Well, have fun. That's how we close it up as recruiters. But sometimes hiring managers say, "Oh, okay. Well, what league is your kid in? What age range?" And like it gets to down in the minutia of areas where we shouldn't be delving. So yeah, that's such a great example of what happens in real life every day. And hiring managers sometimes don't realize that that is not really for probing. Like unless it's directly related to can they do this job, I would advise hiring managers to stay away. But that it actually leads to the second B that I jotted down after be aware is be candid, right? And that's important for us to be, candid in setting expectations with our clients and our candidates, but also with the hiring manager. So sometimes that being candid means telling your hiring manager, hey, I overheard the screening. Next time, stick to the script. You know what I mean? Like I gave you 5 questions to ask. Let's use that. Let's compare apples to apples, and you'll have the same information on every candidate. So yeah, that's a great way to, talk about really how we can be candid as recruiters with both our partners and our, prospects that we're talking to.
It is so important. And you're right. Like we are trained professionals in hiring, but hiring managers aren't. And it's such a big deal now. We're dealing with so much harassment or discrimination. The question has come up. We live in a kind of unsteady time right now, and you just really have to make sure that that information does not get in the hiring manager's hands. But it does help to know what could go wrong. Not that particular question.
Right.
But before you present the offer, like you were saying, this might not be something that would, do that. Like, oh, you're thinking in your head, you have a life on the weekends because this company offers no life.
Right. We don't have a work-life balance. It's just work. But who's that candid, right? And that leads to the third B, which is be transparent. I've worked in environments where we joke internally that Wednesday is the new Saturday. Like we didn't have time off. There was even a company I worked at and they called it, I won't say the company name, but it was the company curse of divorce, where engineers would work, 8 months, no weekends off, and end up ruining their family, so those are pieces like we have to be transparent if we want to engage candidates throughout that whole process. Even if that means saying, hey, I'm sure you noticed I sent you that email at 9 o'clock on the weekend, like that's just kind of like the speed that we move around here, and just dropping it. You don't have to ask them if they're open to it, but they'll see when they start getting your timestamped emails and you're working around the clock. Like if that's indicative of your culture, you ought to be transparent and don't try to sell a 9 to 5 if that's not really what it's going to look like when that person starts.
Well, because you bring a great point. If you're not transparent, you will lose them as you go down your, whatever the order is of what you're trying to do, the workflow.
Right. And how painful is it to lose someone like in the 11th hour? Like you've just been telling them what they want to hear for, weeks. And now you get to offer stage and that's when they back out. Like that's a heartbreak. I would rather be candid and transparent up front. And after that 15-minute call, them say, this is probably not for me. Great. So that's 15 minutes. We can keep in touch. Let's connect on LinkedIn and then you can move on to the next, candidate. But I notice, recruiters get really into selling. That's what I hear a lot. It's like, I understand part of my job is to sell, but most of my job is really to be an advocate. I want to advocate for the candidate, understand your skills and experience. I want to represent my company and the hiring managers and then kind of find a happy medium. So it's not just about selling candidates on some pipe dream. You know what I mean? It's about being realistic with where they are, being honest. And part of that comes from knowing what your company's all about, knowing the company's mission and values. And some of us don't know that, and we're just working from the job description. Like some of us can't even get time with the hiring manager So we too are looking at the same job description that the candidate is, and we don't have any other information to add value. We're just like, you know, when they ask a question, like, oh, I think that's in the job description. Go ahead and read the job description again. And then if you have more questions, let me know. Because sometimes we don't have the information we need.
I used to say, you know, you're a sorcerer, you're not a sorcerer. You know,
right.
Maybe they don't need work-life balance. Maybe they are fine with the crazy environment where the code is interesting, or they're the only one they like to keep busy. We put our personal situation on candidates a lot of times, like, oh, he's kind of a jerk. They love each other, you know.
It's a bunch of jerks working here. He might be perfect.
They might love each other. I did have a hiring manager once. He was so hard to please, and he was such a jerk, and I would get so mad. He, you know, most of the time I was agency, and I'd get so excited when I got a job order, but when he called, I'd go, this is so hard. And I sent him this guy that I thought was unhireable. Loved him.
What do you know?
Best hire they ever made, 2 peas in a pot. I was like,
oh, wow.
Long wow. Listen, be transparent, and you know, maybe that.
That's such a good point. Yeah, and that's so true. We do let our own preferences get in the way. You know, like you and I were pretty bubbly and outgoing. So if we're talking to someone who's a little bit more guarded and, you know, it feels like pulling teeth, then we want to say, oh, they're not a good candidate. But they could be good. They just, you know, they didn't warm up to us, or it's the beginning of their day and they haven't had coffee. So you're right, you can't read into it, right? Because you may end up losing a candidate that would have been one to stay with you for the whole process. Absolutely.
Now, I want to remind everybody we have 13 more minutes. Gosh, we're starting to do this a lot. These short ones, we're going to have to figure out a way to do a long one with you. You do have those questions. Make sure and put them in the question box or tweet them out so we can get those answered. And if we don't, I will send them to Maisha and get them there. If you've learned something and you want to share this conversation, this will be recorded and we'll be sending it to you later. That's my little thing that I have to do midway through.
Nice, like a little commercial break. I should have taken a sip of water.
I know. I should like have something floating that says RecruitingDaily, whatever. I'll do it. I should do that.
Yes, do it in post, as they say in Hollywood. Do it in post. Right. Cheekbone check. Let's get the cheekbones right.
Yeah, blue steel. So another thing that you had mentioned was, you know, we're getting through the process, and some of these candidates, maybe you have to say, this isn't a great idea. I'd like to stay in touch. Now, while I was at Digital Disruption this year, they had a class or a session that was turning candidates into customers. And what they were doing, they worked in retail. These particular ones worked in retail. And they said that when a person didn't get an offer, they would send them a gift certificate to the company or a catalog or a free cup of coffee. Do you think that's a good way to keep a candidate? Or I was like, oh, thanks. Now you want my money. You're not going to hire me. I'm not getting paid. And you want me to buy some shoes? No. Right. About that.
Don't hate on the discount though, Jackie.
Hey, right.
I have to tell you, this is a perfect segue into the fourth B. So I have B, responsive. So I have to share my retail example because it goes right in line with this. So one, I do agree, treating candidates as customers, I think is a great way to go. It's a great way to look at it because the customer's always right, right? I interviewed with a retail firm, big firm, retail company, and they flew me out. Put me up in a nice hotel. I had a whole day of interviews. I dropped handwritten thank you notes in the mailbox on the way to the airport leaving, and I get back and just crickets, no response. So I reached out to the coordinator. I had to get some things reimbursed. It was like pulling teeth to get my, reimbursement. And then weeks went on and I still didn't get closed out. Yet the recruiter who engaged me was still following me on Twitter and we're still connected on LinkedIn. So it left such a bad taste in my mouth, just not getting the no, that I stopped shopping there. This was a place I was going every week, faithfully spending buku money in. And just that experience turned me off as a customer. And years later, I don't miss going in the place. Like I found some alternative and it's all good. So I think looking at your candidate as a customer could actually salvage those moments. Had they just said no, sent me a generic email and sent me a $5 certificate, I would have used it and kept shopping. But just, you don't think about how that affects your brand experience. And I had never had a bad experience with the brand, but I was just like, wow, that's how they treat somebody after they fly them out. You know, I'm taking time off of work to go and being away. And yeah, so I think that's a brilliant idea, to really value that interaction. And sometimes we think being responsive after the interview and giving bad news will put us in a very awkward situation. But the truth is, I've made rejection calls before. You have too, and we both survive. Right? It's awkward for 30 seconds, and then you go on with your day. But the candidate is typically very appreciative, even if it's a standard stock email or if it's a phone call. At Google, we actually had to call everybody. That was so unnerving to me when I found out. I was like, really? We have to call everybody? Anybody who had interviewed, even on the phone, who didn't come in, they had to get the rejection verbally. So it was uncomfortable the first 50 times I did it, but you know, after a while, you're like, okay, this is just part of the work. And all the calls went well. People were usually appreciative that I had called to, you know, give them the no. I think there was one situation where the guy was like, really, you interrupted my dinner for this? So I mean, I was like, I could live with that. I was like, sorry, what you eating? You know what I mean? Like, my bad. Right. But, you know, being responsive, I think, is a great way to keep people engaged. And even before you get to the yes or no, just keeping them in the loop every week with a light check-in. And like you said, closing out with something nice, a little token, a gift certificate. I think it's a nice touch.
I do too. This one girl, she said that she was hardcore Adidas fan, and they sent her a big, beautiful Nike catalog. It wasn't even a coupon, and she became a Nike fan from there on out.
Wow. See, that's interesting. So not only brand loyalty, but just new, you know, onboarding new customers. I love that.
Yes.
I love that.
I think it's well, Dan Klaus asked a question, and I appreciate you being here. And he said or asked, in situations where the reason the interview or the hiring process is taking an eternity is because the hiring manager is suddenly nowhere to be found to get feedback on the candidates. How do you keep the candidate engaged when you don't even know what's going on?
Yes, I love that question. It was Dan. Thank you for asking that, Dan. I think it goes back to the third B we talked about, is be transparent. So what I found is that a lot of times candidates don't realize all the internal hurdles that you're jumping over just to get their resume reviewed, to get the coordinator to send out a confirmation, to book a room. You know what I mean? So many small things, logistics can get in the way. So again, I'm an advocate for being candid and transparent and just letting them know you don't have to spill all the tea, right, of what's going on in your organization, but you can say, hey, candidate, you know, I realize this is week 3 of a process that I thought would take, you know, 2 weeks, but here we are. You know, some teams are away. We have unlimited time off, and so some of our, you know, people are away, and so I appreciate your patience as you bear with me. And most of the time, that's enough. You don't even have to delve more into it. But yeah, so many times we have these internal blockers. It could be, to Dan's point about, you know, people being slow to respond. It could actually be some movement going on internally that we can't share with the candidate, you know, managers shifting or role shifting. And so we have to stall and buy time. We use this phrase, keeping them warm, right? So I like to be as candid as I can. I've seen some recruiters make up extravagant long stories and fairy tales about why they aren't getting back to people. But I just, you know, shoot them a quick email and just say, hey, I'm still waiting for an answer. You know, if anything changes on your end, that goes back to being aware. If anything changes on your end and you have some offers that are exploding and you have fast turnarounds on those decisions, please let me know. Keep me in the loop. But in the meantime, I'll just keep you posted. And usually that works for people.
I'll tell you too, one of the things that I used to do in those situations, that I used to call every week and let them know nobody's been hired for the job. So you're not out of the running. And then I would ask them where they've interviewed the last week. How do they think it went? Let them know information. If I know about the company, and this is agency side, but like, oh, that's a great company. I know such and such. Did you meet with them? So then it lets them know that you actually care about them. And then I always, even if I talk to them every day, I would say, just as a friendly reminder, if we make an offer at $75K and this amount of benefits, are you still able to give me a yes on the spot? Because that goes back to your what could go wrong scenario, you know? And if they did, like the Google friend, say, have you heard back from Google from a year ago?
Right. Right.
Giselle Blomstein, she's here, and she said, I have a similar question. Ooh, it's a long one, so hang tight.
Okay.
I've submitted a candidate to a company. They say they needed the position to be filled yesterday. However, it's taken forever. I've asked for feedback with the company, haven't heard back from them so far. How can I expedite the decision process with the hiring manager? It's true. It's a true fact. The candidate won't wait forever. And since I work on contingency, I can also submit this candidate to another company. What can I tell the hiring manager in order to get this expedited?
That happens so frequently. Even when you're not a third-party recruiter, when you're in-house, sometimes it's hard to catch a hiring manager. What's been successful for me, usually I'll get the buy-in of my, manager, the VP, or whoever I'm reporting to, is to say to the hiring manager, hey, Jackie, hiring manager I love, you haven't been responsive for the past 2 weeks, and I have some pretty in-demand candidates. So I'm going to assume that your silence means this position is no longer a priority. I'll do what I can to put the position on hold or close it. And in the meantime, I'm going to advise this candidate to pursue some other options. And usually that gets the hiring manager all of a sudden in my inbox saying, oh, no, don't put it on hold. Don't close it. I'm ready to interview. So sometimes you have to play, strategically internally to get what you want, or what you need really for the candidate. But it goes to the last B, which is be understanding, right? Because the hiring managers, they're there to coach their team, build their teams, but keep in mind they also have another responsibility. They're paid by the company to do something else, whether they're an engineer or an accountant, or whatever they may be, administrative assistant, when they're not hiring. So be understanding and find out what you can do to make it easier for them. I used to have a hiring manager that I would send like maybe 5 or 6 resumes to at a time. And I thought I was being helpful by doing that, but it actually overwhelmed them. I didn't know until I asked. So then I started sending 3. This is one is right on target, and these other 2 are a little bit, under and overqualified. What are your thoughts? And that was an easier way for him to quickly glance it and reply to me immediately. And he would usually pick 2 out of the 3, versus when I was sending 6, I wasn't getting any responses. So be understanding, be willing to be flexible in how you're communicating, and submitting candidates, and see what you can do on that end. But yeah, if all else fails and you're in that position where you are a contingency, I know time is of the essence. If you have to refer that candidate elsewhere, if it's within the policies that you're operating under, you have to do it. And that'll be that hiring manager's loss.
Giselle, I thank you so much. Yes, it's okay. Let them know if you're going to send them to another candidate. I can tell you, I'm a little crazy with this stuff, and it used to drive me crazy. I heard about this. I don't remember where I heard it, but a passive aggressive, don't tell anybody I told you this, is I would send an email to the hiring manager, ask him about the position. I would let him know the percentage that is dropped of the chance that he was going to accept the position, and also let him know how much money that it's costing the company while he doesn't have somebody in place.
Wow.
Right. So you take the salary, you divide it by 2080. So that's going to be the hourly rate. You multiply that by how many days. And then when you get that information, you're like, I know that you're busy, but so far, because we don't have a response, you are costing your department $5,000.
I love that. You hit on where it hurts. And when you start talking dollars and cents, you get their attention. I love that so much, Jackie. And it aligns with what I'll talk about next week at ERE about retention, which is that it costs an average of 90% to 200% of someone's annual salary to replace them. So if you're talking about a $100,000 employee, it's going to cost your company up to $200,000 in time, resources, and lost productivity to even replace the person. So when these job openings drag on, that's a great way to just hit them where it hurts and talk money, honey.
And it makes sense because you tell people it costs more to replace them. They don't know what that is until you show them this is how much it costs.
Right. So, I love that.
So now we're at 50% on top of whatever the salary was. Giselle, thank you so much. You're both so awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And it's time, guys. I hate that we have to shut it down, but you can reach That was so cute.
Oh.
You can reach Maisha on Twitter. She's the talent genie. Yes. And spell your name for everybody in case they don't know what's on the invite. But
yeah, it's Maisha. So you can find me. You can Google me. Find me on LinkedIn. And Maisha means life in Swahili. So have a nice life.
And I hope everybody who's going to ERE, make sure you catch her session because she's awesome and great.
Oh,
and I hope you'll come back.
Yes, for sure. We'll have to do this again. And thanks to everyone who tuned in on your Friday morning, taking time out of what you're doing. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And Nancy and Giselle and Dan, thank you for your comments and thoughts. Yes. This will be recorded and we'll make sure that you get it. And we will see you next Friday at 1 Eastern. And we're just going, we're going to keep talking, Recruiting Live.
That's right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye now.